Once upon a time, in the busy city of Warri, there lived a man whose heart was darker than his smile. His name was John Bosco, and he was the kind of man who prayed for his wife to die during childbirth. Yet, to everyone who knew him, John Bosco looked like a devoted husband and a responsible man. He dressed neatly, spoke gently, and never missed church on Sundays. People often pointed at him and whispered with admiration, "That man fears God." But they were wrong. What they did not know was that behind closed doors, John Bosco carried a secret so wicked that even the walls of his house seemed to shrink away from it. He was married to a woman named Lina, a quiet and gentle woman whose only crime in life was loving him too deeply. John Bosco did not marry Lina out of love. He married her out of obligation. Lina had gotten pregnant, and his family, especially his mother, had forced him to do the right thing. In Warri, reputation mattered. A child outside wedlock was a stain no family wanted. So John Bosco agreed to the marriage, smiled for pictures, and stood at the altar, but his heart was never there. His love belonged elsewhere. There was another woman. Her name was Sarah. Sarah was everything Lina was not. She was bold, stylish, and loud in laughter. She lived abroad and worked in the UK, and John Bosco believed she was his true soulmate. With Sarah, he felt alive. With Lina, he felt chained. Every time Lina smiled at him, he felt trapped. Every time she tried to touch him, he pulled away. Her soft voice irritated him. Her kindness annoyed him. Her presence reminded him of a life he never wanted. Lina, on the other hand, believed in love with her whole heart. She believed love could grow. She believed marriage could change things. From the day she found out she was pregnant, she held on to hope. Hope that the child would soften John Bosco's heart. Hope that responsibility would turn into affection. Hope that patience would be rewarded. She endured his coldness, his silence, the way he never looked at her for too long, the way he always faced his phone instead of her in bed. She told herself, God will touch his heart. But John Bosco's heart only grew harder. As Lina's pregnancy advanced, John Bosco grew more distant. He stayed out late, claimed work stress, and sometimes slept in the living room. At night, while Lina rested her hand on her growing stomach and whispered prayers for a safe delivery, John Bosco lay beside her texting Sarah, smiling at messages that promised him freedom. Then the day came. Labor pains started in the early hours of the morning. Lina woke up shaking, sweat pouring down her face. Her voice was weak as she called John Bosco's name. He opened his eyes slowly, looked at the clock, and sighed. Instead of panic, there was relief. He drove her to the hospital calmly, almost like he was dropping off an unwanted parcel. Lina cried softly in the car, holding her stomach, while John Bosco focused on the road, his face blank. At the hospital in Warri, nurses rushed Lina into the labor ward. John Bosco followed briefly, kissed her forehead lightly, and said, "You'll be fine." Lina smiled weakly. "Please pray for me," she whispered. "I will," he replied. But that prayer was not the kind Lina imagined. John Bosco went back home instead of waiting at the hospital. He locked himself in the bedroom, knelt beside his bed, and clasped his hands together. But the words that came out of his mouth were not words of love or concern. He prayed that the doctors would fail. He prayed that complications would arise. He prayed that Lina would not survive childbirth. In his mind, her death would set him free. Free to marry Sarah. Free from responsibility. Free from guilt. "You know my heart," he whispered desperately. "I never wanted this marriage. Please, let this end today." Outside, rain began to fall heavily. Thunder rolled across the Warri sky like a warning, but John Bosco ignored it and continued praying. He imagined life without Lina. Her quiet footsteps gone. her soft voice erased from his house. He imagined calling Sarah with the news. He imagined mourning publicly and celebrating privately. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Lena screamed in pain as nurses rushed around her. Her labor was long and difficult. Hours passed. Blood stained the sheets. Doctors exchanged worried looks. "She's losing too much blood," one of them said. The baby's heartbeat slowed. "We need the husband now," a doctor ordered. Calls were placed to John Bosco, but his phone lay face down beside his bed. He was too busy praying for death to hear the call for help. Lena drifted in and out of consciousness, whispering her husband's name. In her weak mind, she believed he was somewhere praying for her to survive. She did not know the truth. By dawn, the hospital room smelled of antiseptic and fear. Lena's pulse weakened. A senior doctor finally spoke with a heavy voice. "She needs blood immediately. Her blood type is rare." Nurses rushed around, calling blood banks and emergency contacts. Time was slipping away. Back at home, John Bosco suddenly felt a strange tightness in his chest. His prayer felt heavy on his tongue. Before he could continue, his phone rang loudly. He answered. "Your wife is dying," the doctor said urgently. "You need to come now." John Bosco's heart skipped, not with fear, but with something close to relief. As he grabbed his jacket, already preparing fake tears, the doctor added words that froze him. "You are the only known match for her blood. Without your blood, she and the baby will not survive." The room spun. The woman he prayed to die now needed him to live. And for the first time, John Bosco realized that heaven had heard every word he whispered in the dark. The hospital corridor in Warri felt colder than the early morning rain outside. John Bosco sat on the long metal bench, his hands shaking, his heart beating like it wanted to tear out of his chest. The doctor stood before him, eyes tired but firm. "Your blood can't save her," the doctor said again. "There is no time to waste." John Bosco looked past him, through the glass window, into the labor room. Lena lay weak on the bed, her body pale, her lips dry, her hair soaked with sweat. Tubes were attached to her arms. Machines beeped steadily, fighting to keep her alive. Her stomach still rose and fell, heavy with the child struggling inside her. John Bosco swallowed hard. If he agreed, Lena would live. If she lived, his prison would continue. Sarah's face flashed through his mind. Her laugh, her voice, the life she promised him. Freedom, a fresh start, no responsibilities, no guilt. He stood up slowly. "I can't," he said. The doctor stared at him, shocked. "Sir, this is your wife, your own child." "I'm not feeling well," John Bosco replied coldly. "I can't donate blood." The words tasted bitter in his mouth, but he forced them out anyway. He signed the refusal form with trembling hands and turned away without looking back. Inside the labor room, alarms began to sound. Lena's condition worsened rapidly. Nurses shouted instructions. Doctors moved faster. Blood pressure dropped. Oxygen levels fell. The baby was delivered moments later. Still, silent. A nurse covered her mouth as tears filled her eyes. The doctor shook his head slowly. Lena slipped into unconsciousness as her organs began to fail one after the other. Outside, John Bosco sat alone, whispering to himself, "It's over. It's finally over." But destiny had not finished writing his story. In another part of the hospital, a young man named Timothy had come to visit his elder sister who had just undergone surgery. Timothy was a calm man, kind-hearted and well-respected in his community. As he walked past the emergency ward, he overheard frantic voices. "We need blood urgently," a nurse cried. "Her blood type is very rare." Without hesitation, Timothy stepped forward. "Test me," he said. "I'm willing to donate." Within minutes, tests were conducted. Match confirmed. The hospital burst into movement again.
Blood was drawn, drips were prepared. Life slowly flowed back into Lina's failing body. Outside the ward, John Bosco watched everything with growing irritation. His relief drained away as he saw Timothy being wheeled out, weak but peaceful. Something inside him snapped. He stormed toward Timothy angrily. "Why would you do this?" he snapped. "Can't you mind your business?" Timothy stared at him in disbelief. "Excuse me?" "My wife and child were dying," John Bosco continued bitterly. "I never wanted this marriage."
Nurses froze. Doctors stopped working. Heads turned. Timothy shook his head slowly. "Life is not a punishment," he said, "and a child is not a trap. One day you will answer for this." He walked away. Inside the labor room, the blood transfusion began to work. Color slowly returned to Lina's face. Her breathing steadied. Suddenly, the baby let out a weak cry. Alive! Doctors rushed into action. Against all odds, both mother and child survived. When the doctor came out with the news, John Bosco felt the ground shift beneath him. "Your wife is stable," the doctor said, "and the baby survived." John Bosco could not speak. His secret prayer had been rejected loudly by heaven. Hours later, Lina woke up. The first thing she asked for was her child. Tears streamed down her face as the baby was placed in her arms. "Thank you, God," she whispered. But the truth soon reached her ears. She learned that her husband had refused to save her. The pain was deeper than childbirth. As she stared at her sleeping baby, memories flooded her mind. Memories of the day she met John Bosco years ago. She had been a student then, returning from school on a bus in Warri. John Bosco sat beside her and started a conversation. He was kind, charming, friendly. Then tragedy struck. John Bosco was involved in a terrible accident that day. He was rushed to the hospital unconscious. Lina followed, shaking but unharmed. Doctors demanded payment before treatment could begin. All Lina had was her school fees, money her poor mother raised by selling the last piece of land her late father left behind. She stood in the hospital corridor, holding the brown envelope tightly. Two choices stood before her: save a stranger's life or secure her future. With tears burning her eyes, she walked to the cashier. "Please," she whispered, handing over the envelope, "use this to save his life." That decision destroyed her dreams. She never returned to school. Her mother later died of heartbreak. John Bosco woke days later and heard the story. He cried, promised her heaven, promised love, promised forever. But promises are easy on hospital beds. Years later, as Lina lay in her hospital bed, holding her miracle baby, she finally understood. Some people are saved by sacrifice, but never learn gratitude. And John Bosco was one of them. Once Lina returned home from the hospital with her baby, the house in Warri no longer felt like a home. It felt like a waiting room filled with silence, bitterness, and unanswered prayers. John Bosco became a stranger living under the same roof. He refused to carry the child. He refused to touch Lina. He moved out of their bedroom and slept on the couch or returned home late, sometimes not at all. Whenever Lina looked at him, she saw a man who had watched her die and chose freedom instead. Still, she tried. She cooked his favorite meals. She spoke gently. She prayed quietly. She hoped that the miracle of survival would soften his heart. But John Bosco's heart had turned to stone. One evening, Lina sat in the living room, rocking her baby gently. Her eyes were red from crying silently for weeks. When John Bosco walked in, she gathered courage and spoke. "How long will you punish me and this child for being alive?" she asked softly. John Bosco dropped his keys loudly on the table. "You trapped me," he replied with venom. "You ruined my life." The words cut deep. For the first time in their marriage, Lina raised her voice. "I saved your life," she said, shaking. "I carried your child. I almost died, and this is what I get?" The argument exploded. Years of pain poured out in angry words. In tears, Lina wrapped her baby in a shawl and stepped out of the house. She walked toward the beach, the only place that ever calmed her heart. There, with the sound of waves crashing gently, she called her best friend, Doris. She told her everything. Doris listened quietly, her heart breaking. "I'll come see you tomorrow morning," Doris promised. That night, John Bosco did not look for his wife. His mind was elsewhere. Sarah was arriving in Nigeria the next day. The woman he truly loved. The woman he told he was still single. He slept peacefully, dreaming of freedom, while his wife battled despair alone. Morning came. Doris woke with a strange heaviness in her chest. She called Lina again and again. No answer. Panic set in. She rushed to the beach. There, near the shore, she saw Lina's slippers. Her heart stopped. Fishermen gathered nearby. The sea had given up something terrible. A baby's body was found in the water. Doris screamed. Authorities were called. The beach was sealed. Doris shook as she dialed John Bosco's number. "They found the baby," she cried. "We need you here." John Bosco paused, annoyed. "I'll come later," he said coldly, and hung up. Instead, he drove to the hotel to meet Sarah. But destiny does not forget. News spread fast. Church members, neighbors, and family heard what happened. Whispers turned to anger. Questions were asked. Investigations began. Lina's body was later found further down the shore. The city of Warri mourned. At the funeral, the truth came out. Doctors spoke. Doris spoke. Timothy spoke. The whole world heard how John Bosco refused to donate blood, how he abandoned his wife, how his prayers were not for life, but for death. Sarah heard too. She stood up quietly and walked away from him forever. John Bosco lost everything in one day. His reputation, his lover, his peace. He returned to an empty house haunted by memories. At night, he heard Lina's soft voice calling his name. He saw her face in his dreams, holding the baby he never loved. Years later, people still spoke of Lina. They spoke of her sacrifice, her kindness, her quiet strength. And they spoke of John Bosco as a warning. Because goodness does not die quietly, but wicked prayers always return to the one who prayed them.